Here is your reworded version with wording adjusted only. No headings, no added commentary. And sensitive or risky phrasing softened while keeping your structure and tone intact. Something unusual just happened, and many people barely noticed. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was quiet, sudden, and revealing. And in politics, the moments that matter most are often the ones that don't come with announcements. Donald Trump didn't lose a debate. He didn't face a protest. He didn't step into a new controversy. He simply withdrew from public view. And that withdrawal is raising questions larger than the event that was canceled. Because when a figure built on constant visibility suddenly pulls back, it is rarely random. It is instinct. Over the next few minutes, we're going to look at what likely contributed to this abrupt cancellation, why even close allies are acting differently, how media reactions suggest unease behind the scenes, and why this moment feels different from previous controversies. This isn't about rumors or speculation. It's about patterns, reactions, and what happens when power starts managing perception instead of directing it. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this single decision may reveal more about Donald Trump's current political standing than any rally speech ever could. It didn't happen with alarms or dramatic announcements or even visible last-minute changes. It happened quietly, almost awkwardly. The kind of cancellation that can reveal more than any press statement. Because when Donald Trump pulled back this time, it didn't appear to be about strategy, timing, or optics. It appeared to be instinct. The instinct of someone who senses that being seen may now carry more risk than staying out of sight. And that instinct has appeared more frequently in recent months. There are two things Donald Trump has historically avoided more than almost anything else, especially at this stage of his political career: visible rejection and visible vulnerability. And both were waiting the moment he stepped outside the carefully managed environments his team works to maintain. Trump understands public reaction in a way many politicians never do. Not as background noise or partisan messaging, but as a personal signal of relevance. And lately, that signal has not always been favorable. Because no matter how carefully audiences are selected, reactions can still be heard. Clear, unmistakable, and difficult to dismiss. And he is aware of it. But public reaction is only part of the story. The other part, the one that may matter more, is what happens when attention shifts from the brand and slogans to the individual himself. The pauses that last a bit longer, movements that seem heavier, moments that don't land the way they once did. In politics, perception doesn't just influence reality, it often shapes it. That's why this cancellation matters. Not because of what was canceled, but because of what it may reflect. And to understand that, you have to look at what has been unfolding behind the scenes. Donald Trump has always sought attention, but attention only serves him when it reinforces the image he wants projected. Lately, attention has been doing something different. It has been inviting questions, highlighting small inconsistencies, and placing the focus a little closer than his team might prefer. And that's where discomfort begins. In recent weeks, several major outlets have started circling a topic that Trump's inner circle treats as highly sensitive: his physical condition and stamina. Not in terms of medical claims or diagnoses, but in visible, everyday observations about how he appears and speaks in public. When journalists ask questions that can't be dismissed with insults or distractions, responses from Trump's operation have tended to be defensive and unusually sharp. And defensiveness often signals that an issue feels exposed. When reporters from the Daily Beast asked about a visible mark on Trump's hand, it wasn't framed as an accusation. It was a routine request for clarification. But the response they received was unusually hostile and dismissive. That reaction suggested just how sensitive this topic has become. Because when simple questions trigger intense pushback, it often means the concern already exists internally. This wasn't an isolated moment. Over the past year, more commentators and political observers have begun voicing concern not through direct claims, but through cautious questions. Questions that linger. Questions that audiences start asking themselves once the idea is raised. And that is where political risk grows. Because once people start watching through a new lens, Every small moment gains added weight. Even voices that once dismissed such concerns as overblown have started shifting tone, not making accusations, but noting changes and wondering what they might mean. When multiple major outlets converge on similar observations, it suggests a broader narrative forming. And Trump understands narratives better than most. Once established, they are extremely difficult to undo, especially when reinforced by visual impressions and unexplained absences. You can challenge a headline. You can criticize reporters. But you cannot easily counter what people believe they are seeing for themselves. And that is why visibility may now carry risk rather than benefit. The timing of this cancellation matters because it followed closely after a major international appearance where scrutiny was intense and cameras unavoidable. Instead of embracing continued exposure, Trump pulled back sharply. That shift alone suggests that the cost-benefit calculation of public appearances may have changed. At the same time, others in his orbit did not step back. Figures like Mike Johnson and J.D. Vance appeared at events, spoke publicly, and filled the space Trump left behind. That contrast raised a natural question. Where is Trump, and why isn't he there? In Trump's political world, absence is rarely accidental. It is tactical. And when tactics shift from dominance to avoidance, it suggests a leader responding to pressure rather than directing it. This is where the story becomes less about a single canceled appearance and more about what it signals. About a leader who once treated public stages as natural territory, now weighing the risks of stepping onto them. About a political operation that knows its central figure may be most vulnerable not when attacked, but when observed closely and without spectacle. Trump is not only navigating critics or media narratives, he is navigating time, expectations, and the unforgiving nature of public perception. Each decision to cancel or reduce exposure adds space for the same question his team wants to quiet. Is this the same Trump, or are we seeing a different phase unfold? That question does not need an immediate answer to matter. It only needs room to exist. And every absence or overreaction to routine scrutiny gives it more space. What followed the cancellation may be even more revealing. Because silence creates a vacuum, and in politics, vacuums fill quickly. Sometimes with allies trying to reassure, sometimes with opponents pressing harder, and sometimes simply with reality asserting itself without intention. After Trump stepped back from public view, coverage expanded rather than faded. Discussions moved across cable panels, opinion pages, podcasts, and private conversations within Republican circles that rarely reach microphones, but often shape decisions. In conservative media, the first response was predictable. Criticism of the press, ridicule of the questions, and insistence that nothing was wrong. But the intensity of those responses hinted at deeper concern. Confident movements do not usually need such forceful denial. What was missing from the defense was Trump himself. For someone who built his political brand on constant presence and dominating the news cycle, his continued absence became the loudest signal of all. And as days passed, supporters accustomed to frequent appearances began to notice. Privately, Republican strategists began assessing scenarios and risks, quietly recalculating what had once seemed certain. Loyalty and self-preservation always coexist in politics, and when vulnerability appears, distance becomes part of the equation. The visibility of figures like Johnson and Vance only sharpened the contrast. Here were party leaders speaking comfortably and projecting stability, while the party's central figure remained unseen. Optics always tell a story, whether intended or not. Internal disagreements, such as Vance's public clash with Laura Loomer, added another layer, showing how quickly tensions can surface when the unifying presence of Trump is less visible. His role has long been less about shared ideology and more about personal influence. When that influence recedes from view, fractures become easier to see. Meanwhile, coverage continued. With Trump absent, attention returned to previous footage, past appearances, and subtle comparisons over time. Not to diagnose, but to observe. And sustained observation can shift public perception. Repetition turns curiosity into concern. Trump has always had a confrontational relationship with the press, but also a mutually reinforcing one. Coverage kept him central. This time, coverage was not amplifying his message. It was analyzing him. And that difference matters. Inside his operation, aides reportedly face the challenge of balancing protection with visibility. Every appearance carries risk. But every cancellation invites speculation that is harder to control than a live microphone. The issue becomes politically sensitive not because of any single report, but because it intersects with Trump's long-standing image of strength and endurance. That image has insulated him from controversies that would have weakened other politicians. But once that image softens even slightly, it threatens the foundation of his appeal. This moment is especially difficult because it is unfolding gradually. Not as a dramatic event, but as small signals accumulating, each easy to dismiss alone, but together forming a pattern. Some conservative commentators have begun reframing reduced appearances as discipline or strategy rather than vulnerability. But that reframing itself reflects how expectations have shifted. Trump was never associated with restraint. When restraint becomes the narrative, something has changed. All of this is happening as the Republican Party itself faces questions about its future direction. Trump's reduced visibility forces those conversations into the open, even if no one welcomes them. Political parties plan for continuity, but they also plan for contingencies. And contingency planning is no longer abstract. Ironically, stepping back may be intensifying scrutiny rather than reducing it, because uncertainty creates space for doubt, and doubt spreads faster than certainty. Trump now faces a choice between the risks of being seen and the risks of not being seen, between confronting narratives directly or allowing them to grow in his absence. History suggests that once audiences begin watching for signs of decline, every moment becomes a test. This story is no longer about a single canceled event or a brief mark on a hand. It is about whether Trump's political instincts, once perfectly tuned to attention and media cycles, are still protecting him or now exposing limitations of a style built on constant dominance. The next phase will not be defined only by what Trump says when he returns, but by how people interpret why he stepped back in the first place. And once that interpretation settles, reversing it becomes much harder. Power rarely disappears all at once. It shifts quietly through hesitation, caution, and allies choosing safer language and less proximity. That shift is becoming more visible as Trump's circle appears more insulated and more reactive than before. Where once there was aggressive scheduling and constant exposure, there is now tighter control and heavier reliance on surrogates. That is not how Trump built his rise, and that contrast is precisely why this moment matters. Supporters may not openly acknowledge it, but they can sense it. And inside political circles, conversations are increasingly about how close to stand, not just how strongly to defend. Trump has not lost his base, but movements driven by personality require constant reinforcement of that personality. When reinforcement slows, uncertainty grows at the edges, quietly and gradually. Defenders argue this is just another temporary media cycle. But what feels different this time is the defensive tone, the sharper responses, and the visible calculation behind appearances. Public figures are not reshaped by single moments, but by patterns. And patterns are what linger in memory. Trump has always survived criticism. What is new is that people are now watching him differently, comparing present behavior to past confidence. Visual comparisons are unforgiving. Political power built on dominance struggles most when it encounters limits. And Trump's image has always been rooted in relentless presence. Absence does not fit easily into that myth. There is no dramatic collapse happening. Politics rarely ends that way. It shifts through transitions, attention changes, and leaders gradually losing the ability to command without effort. Trump may return and regain attention for moments, but audiences are now watching what is missing as much as what is present. Once that habit forms, it does not disappear. That is why this cancellation matters. Not as an isolated decision, but as a signal of changing instincts, strategy, and confidence. A sign that even the most media-skilled political figure of this era is confronting limits he cannot fully control. Whether this becomes a footnote or a turning point depends on what follows. But one thing is already different. The assumption that Donald Trump can always overwhelm the narrative through sheer presence is no longer guaranteed. And in modern politics, that realization is often where deeper change begins.